So my presentation today, is IT its own worst enemy? The answer is yes. Thank you very much. So the reason I came up with this presentation is that I saw a lot of IT departments out there that were really good at providing streamlined operations, really good at starting to implement ITIL processes and or other ITSM processes. But in the end, they were defeating themselves by not publicizing those things, by not making sure that the business had a stake in what they were doing. Even though they were trying to align with the business didn't seem to care a whole lot. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of the things that you can do to become more visible to the business, to become more relevant to the business, and to become a true business partner. Now, you've probably heard that term a whole lot, become a true business partner. But I'm going to show you some of the stuff the business is actually looking for, and why, if the business isn't paying attention to you, what you can do to wave your hands a little bit and get in front of them and show them things that they care about. So to set that up, I want to start off by talking about what IT does really well today. So one of the things that IT does well is tracking of metrics and service level agreements and things like that. Most IT departments do pretty well. Would you guys agree? And I apologize if I ask a lot of questions. I try to be a little bit interactive in these things. Would you agree that you guys do a good job at tracking metrics in many cases? Does the business care about them? No. Only IT. IT doesn't get any respect. It's terrible. The reason for it is because your metrics and their metrics are completely different, right? They care about whatever their organizational goals are. If they're a corporation, they're going to care about money. If they're a government organization, they're going to care about whatever metrics about services they're providing, etc. That have nothing to do with the services you're providing to them. So we have to somehow figure out a way to bridge a gap. And I apologize. Is there a way for me to? Can I shut that off there? There we go. There's less echoing now, right? Is that a little better? A little better? So one of the things that I think that IT has started to do is many IT organizations have started to streamline their processes around the business's needs. Now that's a great thing, but then they do it and then they just go ahead and track their own IT metrics again. So you sort of defeat the purpose. Yes, you are providing your services aligned to the business services in many cases. Right now, I'm not saying that I care that the Exchange server is running anymore. I care that the business can effectively communicate, right? So changing IT's goals is the first step of that. And if you're already doing that, then you're already on the path to this. And I'm going to show you a little bit about the maturity curve and how we can get you to the next level of that. So in order to do that, we have to define that the metrics and things that we track on the IT side, since they don't necessarily correspond to the business's goals, we need to figure out how to get them there. And that is also a reason, by the way, that many tool implementations fail, because when we have tools that do things like metrics or they show the status of IT and things like that, the business doesn't have a way to connect those dots. How many people here have an enterprise monitoring solution, like that monitors their servers and services and all that good stuff? Yeah. Most people have that. Would you ever show it to the CFO? Probably not. You probably wouldn't be able to make heads nor tails of it. You would look at it and go, great, my ERP server is running. What does that mean, right? Is that helping us make money? Is it helping us do transactions? Is it helping us serve our clients? What is it doing? So the first step is to understand that the ends that we're looking at, the ends that we're looking at have to be around the organizational goals. They can't be around just collecting metrics. To that point, there was also, okay, so this is interesting. There was a survey that was done asking people about their top 5 priorities for IT. It was asking mostly C-level and director-level people what their top 5 priorities for IT. Can anybody guess what the number 1 answer to that question was? Close. That was on the top 5. It wasn't the top 1. Anybody? Uptime wasn't even on the list. You're on the right track. That's it. Providing technology value to the business. That's what it's all about. That's the number 1 concern of CIOs. Now, that's a big turnaround. 5 years ago, that exact same question The number one priority was security. Number one. What's happened in 5 years that would lessen security? Why would security not be as big a concern now? It's been implemented in a lot of cases. What about the fact that a lot of things have moved to the cloud and I don't have to worry so much about my internal security anymore? I know you're shaking your head. I agree with you, but a lot of CIOs have shifted their thinking away from security being the number one to maybe now being the number two. Number one is providing that business value. So in order to do that, we have to define what we're looking for. And what we're trying to achieve in IT is we're trying to achieve some sort of outcome for the organization. In order to do that, we have to sort of throw away our old definitions of what it is we're trying to do in IT. We're not trying to provide systems and servers and IT services. We're trying to provide business services. Now, we may use IT services to provide them, right? But ultimately, we're trying to provide the organization with whatever it needs to accomplish its goals. How many people in your IT departments actually consider what the organization's goals are on a daily basis? Does anybody have people who do that? Not one hand. Wow. Okay. Good. You're in the right presentation. No, it's something that's actually kind of hard because I don't know about you, but when I was in IT operations, my life was busy enough keeping things running and making sure that people knew what was going on, and I was running support teams and things like that. But in order to get to this, we have to always consider what the organization's goals are. Because if you don't consider the organization's goals, we're never going to be able to track the outcomes that we're looking for. So, for example, I could say, yes, we provide a ERP system to the company, and that lets the company run and do all their great stuff. But why? The question has to be answered, why? Well, because the business needs a system that they can use to transact with customers and deploy or get POs out, pay paychecks. We all like that one, right? Is that a good one? Okay. So in order to get all of that done, we have to have IT systems that support it. Okay. Now I know I'm going into basic service design right at this point, but really we have to always consider the organization's goals if we're going to be able to match up what we present to the organization in a way that makes sense to them. We have to provide that translation because it's much easier to get IT to understand the organization's goals than it is for the organization to understand IT's nomenclature. I'm never going to be able to get the CFO to understand that when we have a LUN that runs out of storage space that stores all of our POs, when we have that LUN run out of space, we have to buy an additional disk tray so that we can provide additional space allocated to that LUN that will provide him the ability to process POs. He only heard one word in that whole paragraph. He heard PO. Okay. So if I go to him instead and say, I need this money so that you can continue to process POs, here's the data that shows your number of POs are going like this, our amount of storage is going like this. If you don't provide me the money to get this thing, here's where those meet, and here's where you're going to start having trouble. If I explain it to the business that way, it not only is easier for the business to consume that data because that's the outcome they're looking for, but it's also easier for me to get budget that way. Because now I've provided a complete business case. I don't even have to provide a big justification or anything like that. All I've said was, you want to continue doing business the way you're doing it, growing the way you're growing? That's great. We want to support you in every way we can. We need this and this to do it. So turning it around rather than saying, I need the money for this. It basically helps IT, and I know that over the last 10 years there's been a big transition away from IT being a pure cost center. But when I say I want to make it so that you guys can be a true business partner, I mean it. But in order to do that, you guys have to understand the business's needs first. Does anybody's IT department do a really good job at understanding the business's needs before they design or implement a system? Business comes to you and says, we need this system implemented, and you guys just do it? Okay. You don't do it? What do you guys do?
Business goes to a completely different development team, and then the development team comes to the IT team. So it's different.
But you're still required to keep all the systems up and running and to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do after development's done.
But that still goes through the other team. There's an interfacing team between IT and the business. You got the development team or the support team or whatever.
Or business analyst or something like that.
Business analyst.
Right. And that's not uncommon. That's not uncommon. The problem is there's oftentimes a disconnect even between those multiple layers, right? So again, outcomes. So you may have a much more complicated system of outcomes rather than just being able to say, here's the business's need, here's how we're filling the business's need. So the development team says, here's the business's need, here's how we're fulfilling it, and IT says, here's how we're fulfilling the development team's needs, which is how they're fulfilling the business's needs. There may be multiple hops there, right? Does anybody remember the old, well, it's not old, it's been around a while, the term business service management, when people started making tools that were trying to track how the business was doing according to what was being provided by IT? Does anybody, BMC made a product, right? BMC made a BSM product. That concept has changed a lot because the collection of data was really good. The output of data was really good, but the matching of a technical to a business income wasn't. So BSM used to be something you heard a lot. Gartner had a magic quadrant for it, Forrester had a wave for it. Neither of those things exist anymore. And the reason they don't exist is because no one was able to fully converge that because organizations didn't understand what the maturity curve was of getting from one to the other. So it's like, I'm providing you this. It's like if Home Depot started selling kits to make your own space shuttle. Well, great, you can make a space shuttle, that's wonderful. Do you understand all the stuff you need to pilot a space shuttle? Well, no. Okay, so now we have a problem, and we've got a solution without a problem. And now we've got a problem that we don't even understand. So BSM kind of died a horrible death. It's still around in some cases, and you'll see it in some areas. But the real problem I see is that they did not focus on outcome. So let me give you a couple case studies of some terrible things that have happened. Because this is always a good way to set up the solution, right? I'm going to tell you about some horrible things that have happened to people I know. And sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're not. This one's sort of funny and sort of not. We have a financial services company that we work for. They're very, very large. They have a lot of call centers. And those call centers, some of those are inbound, some of those are outbound. This one happened to be an outbound call center. So then calling customers saying, hey, would you like to reduce your APR by buying this and getting this credit card? You know, the call that you love getting at 6:30 on a Wednesday. The CEO said, hey, I'm going to be in Indonesia, so I'm going to tour the call center. And it was all set up, and everything was great. We set it up with the sales folks. Everything was happy. CEO shows up. That was a picture taken from his cell phone. There was nobody in the call center. Goes to the call center operation, says, why isn't anybody in the call center? Well, we didn't have any calls today. He says, we didn't have any calls today. How's that even possible? Call sheet came out, it was blank, so we sent everybody home as a training day. Now that's a little extreme example, right? But what happened was they started investigating. So now they go into their problem investigation. Was the database server that puts the calls out, was it working? Yep. Database service route? Yep. Was the printer working that prints it? Yep. All the components, the servers, the infrastructure, everything was working everywhere along the way. Someone had changed a line of code somewhere that caused 0 records to be returned. Now, the reason I point that out is that IT wasn't looking at the business outcomes. IT was looking at the technical bits, and that's it. They were saying, the servers are up, the database is up, the database is working. But no one thought to look at the actual business data coming out of that database to see if it was actually providing the outcome that the business desired. Now, do you think if they'd been tracking the number of calls and it saw 0, then that they would have been able to have a red flag there and say something's wrong with that service? Yeah. So this was one case study that I thought could be easily solved by tracking the business outcomes. Another good example. Now, this case study is more of a generic one, not a specific thing that happened to one of our customers. But every organization has email, right? You all have email? I should hope so. It's past 1994, so we're all good there. I saw some people out in the hallway using BlackBerries, though. Any of you still using BlackBerries? Yeah. I can't get it out of our CEO's hands. She will not give it up. That's okay. That's okay. I like the iceberg metaphor when it comes to email. It's also a good metaphor when it comes to incident versus problem management, but that's for a different day. So with email, we have those things that are visible to everyone, right? People see and I'll use Exchange as an example. People have their smartphones, people have their Outlook, they have their Outlook web access, right? They have those things that are sitting above. These are the things that people are going to complain about, right? But then we have all these other components that sit behind the back end that are providing different things. We have the network, we have Active Directory, we have your email servers themselves, we might have connections to external vendors, we might have power. We've got all sorts of things that are going on that have to be all monitored in order for us to provide those things on top. But the outcome is only related to those things on top. Am I able to get email? Am I able to send email? Am I able to effectively communicate? That's the whole purpose, right? But in order to do that, I do have to have that technical data. So there is going to be business data. The business data could be maybe we send test emails, right? Maybe we make sure that email transport is happening. Maybe we make sure that the clients themselves are operating. This is a good example because in many cases, the technical, while it's one of those things that we have to have, is not the important part to the business. However, it is critically important that we have all of these components in order to provide that service. So hopefully what I'm illustrating here is that, yes, I've got both sides of the coin, but in order to be successful in providing a business service, I need both of those things in one place to match up to show me whether or not I'm achieving a particular outcome. The reason I say this is that if I have the user who isn't able to send email, sometimes the problem is just in their client, right? But sometimes the problem is going to be on the back end. And if the problem is on the back end, then it's probably going to affect more than one person. So some of that goes also to impact analysis, right? I need to figure out what the impact of that service interruption is. Some of that's also a ranking system. Sometimes email may not be the most important thing in an organization. ERPs are typically the most important application in an environment. Not always, but a lot of times. Anybody have a good example of the most important thing that you provide to your organization? Anybody? I don't buy it. No? Come on, somebody.
Well, we're a blood bank, and the most important thing we provide to our organization is the system that helps collect and process it.
So that's a great example. It's all going to be organization specific. And I like your example because it is, right? It has nothing to do with collecting money, generating revenue, or anything like that. Now, you may have other systems that track grants and donations and things like that. Of course, you'll have all that stuff. But the most important thing is that you can process blood donations, process outgoing blood to other organizations, right? It's always going to be like that, right? Every organization is going to be different. I can't give you a definite list and say, here's the things that are going to be important. But what you need to do is, this is another part of working with the organization. Determine what they think the most important things are so that you can put emphasis on them correctly. One other thing that I'll point out about this. There's also a piece of this particular case study that is also very ephemeral. Is email self-contained in my organization? I should hope not. We're sending to other people are sending to us, right? There's lots of things going. How many people here are using Office 365 or Google Apps? Quite a few, right? It's happening more and more. At that point, how am I going to monitor all of this stuff? How am I going to know if the email server is working properly since I don't control the email server? Well, there are ways, obviously, that I can look at it, right? Microsoft provides tools to do it. Google provides tools to do it. I can do ping checks to the servers. I can check on, service delivery delays and all that. So what you're tracking in each one of these things is also going to be specific to your organization. So again, I want to make sure that I'm saying that I'm not providing a blueprint for you. What I'm trying to do is just illustrate the need to define the services better. Because ultimately, it's the goal that's important. What's on the back end is going to be your responsibility. So I also want to stress that I'm not saying that IT's own metrics aren't important. They are important. I need to know what the time to live on a SMTP server is, right? I need to know what the response time of my Outlook Web Access server is. I need to know those things. But the business doesn't, because they don't care. They care, is it fast enough and is it working? Right? Does anybody object with that? I'm happy to have a discussion, by the way. Did they put sleeping gas in the... Okay. Okay, so let me go on about this. So I've been talking about providing metrics to the business that are important to the business, tracking their outcomes. So I hope that some of you thought that I'm sort of talking about business alignment. Probably one of the worst overused terms in ITSM. I apologize. I know it's used in presentations all the time. I'm not talking about business alignment, but it helps. Business alignment is important, right? It's important to make sure that we're providing the right services to the right parts of the organization at the right time. That's all well and good. But there's a lot of things that I need to provide around that have to do with the operation of the service and providing a healthy service to an organization that are going to fall into different areas. And the reason I point that out is that business alignment doesn't really have a lot to do with ITIL and ITSM. Business alignment more has to do with, are we providing the right things to the right people? But there's a lot of things that you guys have to do in order to provide a healthy service that have nothing to do with business alignment. You have to do incident management, right? You have to do your problem management. You have to do cost management, change impact analysis, all sorts of stuff. And if you notice there, I've got some of the pillars of ITIL there and the things that have to be provided in order to make a service work. And none of this is changing with what I'm talking about, because all of those things are still necessary. However, you may need to pull different metrics than you're pulling today about those things that are more relevant to the business outcomes. So, for example, I solved 542 incidents today. Business doesn't care. Do they care that I met my SLA? Maybe. Do they care that I met my SLA for the service itself? Like that the service I provided that was actually up the appropriate amount of time and provided the value they need. See, now there you go. So it's something that's within the ITIL framework, right? But do ITSM tools typically do a good job of that? Anybody have an ITSM tool they think does a really good job of showing the value of the service? No, because it's something that, again, it's a bit more outside the realm of traditional ITSM, even though it falls into all of these buckets. So it's something that to consider is that, okay, step one is I've got to have those outcomes, and that's great. But now, how am I going to track those outcomes? I talked to a SAP business analyst on the phone a couple weeks ago, and he said, I spent 12 hours a week compiling all the statistics from our SAP systems, and then putting them on spreadsheets, and then taking the charts and putting those into a PowerPoint so that I can give it to our executive management, so that I can show them that we're actually doing what we're supposed to be doing from a business perspective using this system. That's not an unusual story. I hear that all the time. So somebody's got to track this stuff. Now, is it necessarily got to be done by taking somebody's time 12 hours a week? Not necessarily. There are ways to do it in operations analytics tools, or to do it in some sort of BI tool to get it all in one place. There are always answers on how to do that. Some of that will require a little more elbow grease than others. But you have to consider that there are lots of things that you already do today that are going to help these outcomes and can help inform them. Because I think one thing that people think of when they think of these business outcomes is they think, okay, now I only need to track the business stuff, the dollars and cents. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the dollars and cents are important to these people. The technical stuff is important to these people. But then there's also probably some data in the middle that's important to other people, right? That's going to tell how the outcome is working. Because that business analyst, he cares about both sides, right? He needs to know the technical stuff's working and that the business is doing what it's supposed to do. But then there's a whole host of other things he needs to know about the actual ERP operations to know that the service is healthy. So again, it's something that you'll have to figure out for your organization's services. So now that I've talked a bit about the problem and how to define the outcomes, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how to get to those outcomes and some of the steps that you can take to help define those outcomes and to track them in the end. So the first thing is the mindset, and I touched on this earlier, but in order to do this, you have to change the mindset. Now, I'm going to just take a survey here, and there's no wrong answer. Don't feel afraid or anything. I'm not going to slap you if you raise your hand on this one. How many people are not managing IT services as IT services today? So you're tracking just technical services, just technical systems?
Oh, you mean us personally managing it or the company managing it?
Does the company, I'm sorry, not you personally, I mean the company. Does your company manage by service?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody not manage by service? I said I wasn't going to hit you. Okay, good. Good. No, that's good. Because that's really the first step of the mindset, right? We have to consider services first. We always have to be thinking about how do we get those services. And it's not necessarily one of those things that's really sexy or anything, but it is a prerequisite for the mindset. The next thing you have to do in order to change your mind about it is you have to consider that there's an abstract understanding of outcomes that have to go along with those service definitions, right? So when we define a service, we always have to define what the business outcomes are. Now it's one of those things. So now I spent a lot of time in the software world on the tools side in ITSM, and one of the things that we did a lot was proofs of concept. Has anybody ever gone through a software proof of concept? I hope most people have, right? You ever heard the vendor say, tell me what this POC needs to do to be successful, right? Tell me what it takes, what we've got to prove we can do in order to get your business. Something we did all the time. You should be the exact same way with the business. When they're trying to adopt a new service, you should say, tell me what we need to prove to you to say that this service is doing what it's supposed to do. That you are getting the value that you need out of it. Now the business is probably going to balk at that. They're probably going to go, well, we need to prove that we're making more money than we made last year. Great, tell me how much money you made last year. Well, don't you have that all in your IT systems? Now, you've got that data somewhere. Somebody's got that data. This is a beautiful part about what I'm talking about. The outcomes, the business can define it. The business can even define where the outcome data has to come from and how we measure success or how we measure improvement. That's great. But ultimately, you guys own all that data. It's somewhere. The data is somewhere. And you guys have control of it, which is good because that makes it easier for you. You don't have to wait for someone to give you something. They just have to give you a definition of what they want. And you probably have people or developers you can interface with to get that information.
So I'd like to hear your thoughts about how the way, at least I perceive that it really works. So, and your point of proof of concept, or you ask your business partner, what do you want in order for me to be successful, for me to show you that this is, we're delivering you value. And they tell you one thing. And then you look at it, everyone does that same thing. Mm-hmm. And then it comes down to politics, or you find out that they really didn't tell you what they really needed to be successful. So how do you deal with that?
So one thing is, service management is about constantly evolving, right? So we have to be prepared for the fact that people aren't going to give us all the facts up front. As you mentioned, there are organizational politics that are always going to creep in. The bigger the organization, the more that happens, right? So what I typically do is I say, first of all, I want you to give me the logical flow of information. Now, some business analyst is going to have this, right? What's the logical flow of information for this service? So if it's an ERP system, for example, he's going to know how data gets from one place to another, to another, to another, before it finally gets output the way it's supposed to be. The second thing I want to know is I want to know what's the business's process. What do you guys do in the business? Like, let's say it's an order-to-cash system, right? Something very, very common that a lot of people have in their ERP systems. I say, okay, tell me from a business perspective, forget the technology. What do you guys do to collect money? What you have to become is you have to become basically a master interviewer. In order to get this down, become a 2-year-old. That's what I would do. Why?
Why?
Until you get the answer you want. I don't mean to be flippant about it. It's true though. Unless you keep asking questions until you get to the root of what it is they're trying to provide, you're never going to get it. Because as you pointed out, there's always going to be somebody standing in your way who wants to do it another way, or there's people who don't know or don't know what they don't know. So if you keep asking why, you'll get to it eventually. But you're also going to have to be prepared that there are going to be things that you can't tell up front, and you're going to have to be adaptable to it. I've got a customer over in Australia that they manage all of the government loans, all of them, for the entire government of Australia. And there's a lot of them. That means financial loans, student loans, everything, all of them. They have an issue where when loans come in, the loan requests come in, they have to be processed in a certain amount of time, or the government penalizes them, right? Something very standard. They knew that they had a certain amount of turnaround time, and they gave that to us as our metric to track. Do you think that was the right metric to give us? So they had to do everything within 5 business days. If it was you, what would you have told me? Great. That's right. So we just had to be adaptable to it. We also found out, by the way, that there was also a metric that they had to track on how many low interest rate loans they did to lower income people versus standard interest rate loans to people who qualified. And that entire thing determined their ability to stay in this government loan program next year. And they didn't tell us about it until the day after our implementation was complete. So this sort of stuff happens. You'll have to be adaptable to it. It just happens. I mean, there is no concrete way to find out. But if it helps, at least if you adopt the stance of, tell me what you need to be successful. And then keep asking those why questions. You have to become a master interviewer. You have to ask those questions. Or somebody in your organization does, right? Somebody has to get you those answers. And sometimes it may take, going to different departments and asking, okay, you interact with these people, what do they really need? And then come back to them and say, hey, we heard that you needed this. Do you really need that? Oh, yeah, oh man, we really do. I mean, it's critical because they have to get that information. Well, you're going to find out those things, and they do change a lot. And the thing is, if we're not adaptable, we can't adapt to business processes changing anyway. Because not only are you not going to be told about things sometimes, but business processes change for what sometimes we in IT see as no apparent reason. I mean, we're going down this road to the left, we're great, we're almost implemented. Oh, business says, okay, now we need to go all the way to the right. Okay, great. I'm sure that's never happened to anybody in here, right? No, good. No, it is something that, it is a requirement that you have to be able to collect that from the business. The other thing that you have to do is you have to be able to extrapolate. And I think that's more to your point as well. You have to sometimes be able to come up with things that may need to be tracked by the business that the business didn't think of. And this is where business analysts in IT become very important. Sometimes you have to be able to look outside the box. And IT is actually not a bad place for that to happen anyway, because we typically have a little bit different mindset than the business. We're a little more analytical on some things, and maybe we're going to come up with questions that the business didn't even consider. So there's some value there as well. Now, one thing that I would recommend, and I'm not paid to say this, so please forgive me for saying it. A lot of times bringing in an external consultant can also help that process. How many times, because this used to happen to me all the time, how many times have you had something that you knew was the exact right thing to do, and you knew the way to do it, and you had a plan, and everything was good, but everyone in the business said, no. Then you brought in a consultant to say the exact same thing that you did, and the business is all, yeah, oh great, I'm really glad you brought that guy in, wow, he really knew what he was talking about. I tell from the chuckles, that's never happened, right? Yeah, it happens, and it happens a lot. Sometimes that external fresh perspective is just what the business needs. So what I do is I have several consultants that I take to lunch or drinks on a regular basis, so that when I need them to come into the organization and tell something to somebody, that they're always available to, because I've got a list of everything that they've ever drank. So, so mindset is one. The next thing is the search. So this sort of bleeds into the conversation we were having, right? You have to find the data. The data is there. Now, it may not be easy to find. It may not be readily available. It may not even be in the right format. But I've got to find the data. Is the information as to whether or not the server is up and running, is that something IT has access to? No. The service is responding. That's IT's information. But the amount of money that we've generated based on orders, does IT own that information? But they have it, right? Somebody in IT is writing or in IT or development is writing a query that can get that information, right? Now, I control the SQL server that it sits on, right? So I have access to it. So all I've got to do is find the right person to give me the query that I need to grab the information to prove the outcome. So it's sort of like playing Sherlock Holmes rather than playing the engineer. I may not be the guy writing the query to find out what it is, because I may not have any access to that database at all. But I know it's somewhere, and I can tell usually, that's why that logical flow map that I talked about is really important, because that logical flow map is going to tell me where the data is going. So I can go to the database guy and say, can you give me a query that pulls this metric from this database on this server? You guys don't have that?
No, because the person that writes that code doesn't have access to the data. It's the business that has access to it. They're administrative people.
Right.
So it goes back to the business, and the business owns it. The business owns the data. They are also the only people that can access it.
So the database administrator who's managing and can't write a query to get the data?
No.
That's unusual.
He's not going to be able to do that.
But the business, if they want to track the outcome, is going to give you that data. Maybe the thing is that it's like saying I want you to give me ice cream, and I have an empty table, and you say, okay, we'll get your bowl and your spoon ready. I'm not going to give you a bowl and a spoon. I've got them, but I'm not going to give them to you. And you're saying, well, you can't have your ice cream then. It's the same thing. I mean, it's that whole thing of if I want to track the business outcome and I want the business to have more investment in what IT is doing, they're going to have to provide that. They're going to have to provide it. But you're going to have to search. You're going to have to dig. You may not know the right person. The person may not be in IT. They may be in a business unit, right? They may not be within your organization. Now, in many cases, IT does control that information, right? In a lot of organizations, they do control it. Smaller organizations, they do.
Yeah, they shouldn't.
That's a discussion for another time. But yeah, but in a lot of cases, they do have access to it or they do control it. But you've got to be able to dig and find that information. A lot of that goes back to that last thing. You have to be that master interviewer. You have to be able to find where it's at. I liken this a lot to being an attorney. There are a lot of attorneys out there who will tell you that they're the best in a courtroom and all that, but most of them will tell you what they're really good at is research. They couldn't possibly know all the laws. Have you seen those books? They're gigantic. They're really good at finding the answers. So the next step, this one's pretty easy, not much to talk about there. You have to baseline what you're looking for. So for example, let's say the business, one of the things they're looking for is how many orders are we receiving on a daily basis? That's one of their metrics that they need to consider. Well, that's great, but you need to find out what the normal is for that. Because without normal, how are you ever going to tell them if the outcome's not being met? Like if the normal is I'm making $1 a day, if I make $500 in a day, is that something that I should flag the business on? You bet your tickets you should. Otherwise, things like servers crashing on Black Friday happen. That's exactly how they happen, by the way. They have not been baselined appropriately. The baseline will also tell you where your variances are and what variances to look out for. And this is in any data, IT data or financial data, right? The next thing you need to look at is causality. It's really important to understand how the link between IT and business data happens and what those linkages are. The example I gave earlier is a pretty simple one, but it's pretty apt. If I have a number of orders coming in to a business application, that's going to affect my capacity in IT, right? Because server space is going to fill up, I'm going to need more web farm, whatever I need. Being able to tie those two things together is really important to the business, because it's really important for my ability to communicate to the business about what IT's needs are. Next one is goals. There's two more, sorry. The next one is goals. Make sure that you have goals for developing these services as they go as well. Having understanding what the business's needs are, what the business's outcomes are great. But having your own goals about how you're going to improve that process is also important. One of the things I see is that people go on this quest to provide data to the business, and they're not really thinking about how they can help the business improve that process. They think about their own process improvement, right? I mean, I see organizations, I talk to them all the time, yeah, we're improving our change management process, we streamlined it, we don't have to have a cab for these types of things happen anymore, and that's great. I'm all for that. I've been an ITSM guy all my life. But knowing how to help the business process improve is helping them consume that data in a better way. If I can show them dashboards that show them that, because we've got this system over here that does some middleware thing, and that's causing a lot of drag down. It's causing people to abandon their shopping cart online, right? I've now provided a goal to the business. I can say, here, the goal is we want to remove this middleware system and do something else, which the business, the CFO's eyes are all going to glaze over when you say that. And they're just going to say, it's going to make it easier for customers to buy stuff. So having those goals in mind and being able to communicate them, which is the next step, are the most important thing. You have to be able to communicate and be your champion to the business. This is where IT is awful. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of IT departments, not a lot, I've seen a few IT departments recently hire marketing people in their IT department to market IT to the business, to tell the business what we're doing. If something isn't working, the business knows, right? Everyone comes to us, everyone complains to us. But how many times when things are just working and doing what they're supposed to do, do people come over and say, hey Mike, great job. What a great job you're doing that everything's working. Does it? Good, that's wonderful. No. It doesn't happen enough, does it, right? It's one of those things. We need to communicate the success that IT is having in tracking those things to the business. You were able to, the business, well, we get those reports. You get those reports in your email. Hey, the organization did this great thing. We got 542 new members. We made, an X millions of dollars this quarter. You guys get those emails from the business, right? Well, why not tie the IT stuff to that? You guys were able to do this because we did this great stuff. Communicating that linkage so that IT is linked in the minds of everyone in the business with those outcomes. And this one goes without saying, collaborate. Always work with the business. This is more about business alignment than anything, but make sure that you are always an advocate for what the business wants. Don't poo-poo their ideas, but offer them alternatives if you see them. Help them save money, help them streamline their operations. They will love you for it. And this one's pretty, and I've only got 1 minute left, right? So I'm going to talk real fast, I apologize. Make sure that you are helping IT or the business invest in IT by providing those things. Those are all going to tie together. The last thing I want to talk about, and I promised to get to this and I apologize. This is really the evolution of technical capability. So everybody is familiar with that top chart? That's from Gartner. That's their IT maturity curve, right? So this is what we see in order to get to that business outcome management. What you have to do at each level of those technical capabilities. Step one is the stuff that you're probably doing today, right? Monitor systems, discover them, provide performance analysis, right? Tell me how things are doing on a technical level. Step two is tell me how the users are experiencing things. Integrate with our incident management solutions so that anything that happens from a technical level gets recorded automatically. And then start doing cross-platform health analysis, not just looking at one system anymore, but starting to look at things as a service. Step three is doing things like starting to use self-adjusting thresholds. So remember I talked about having to figure out what the baseline was. Well, when you get to a certain level of IT maturity, you can actually calculate those things without having to do any research at all, because you can just look at a trend analysis and say, show me what normal is. Every BI tool in the world can show you what normal is. And then start to do things like API discovery and integration. Start integrating with those applications so that the performance that they are giving you and the data they're giving you comes inbound to you instead of you going out and searching for it. That's step 3 of maturity. Step 4 is to start getting truly aligned at the service level. Start doing SLA analysis on the service itself. Most people don't do this, and it totally floors me. Can they tell me what percentage their server was up? Yes. But can they tell me between services, applications, customer service, and incident management, how much the service itself was available to the business? Most businesses cannot do that. And that's a critical step to getting to this outcome-based management, because until I do, I can't really tell the business how we're affecting or not affecting. And then the last step is to start doing what are commonly referred to in the industry as business value dashboards. Start showing the business just proactively how we're doing and how they're doing and how that connects to each other. And I apologize, I'm going to skip the last 2 slides because I'm out of time now. If anybody wants to come talk to me, I'm here all the rest of the day. Firescope has a booth. We are down at the end of the hall. We've got 2 great big orange signs, so it's really hard to miss us. You can't go past us. So please feel free to come talk to me, and I'm happy to have discussions. Thank you very much, everyone.